She hadn't even set her folder down yet. Ryan Mitchell's laugh hit her from across the room, loud, deliberate, designed to land, and every head in that briefing room turned to watch what she would do next. 80 Navy SEALs. 80 men who had survived things that don't get written down. All of them waiting to see if the woman with the lieutenant commander's rank on her collar would flinch. She didn't put the folder down. She didn't look away from him. She walked straight toward him, slow, unhurried. Absolute stopped 2 feet from his face and said the one sentence that made the entire room go silent. If this story is hitting you somewhere deep, subscribe to this channel right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command, Coronado, California, held the kind of silence that only exists when 80 highly trained killers are paying attention to the same thing at the same time. It wasn't a comfortable silence. It was the silence of men who had spent careers learning how to read a room, read a threat, read a situation before it fully developed. And right now, every single one of them was reading the woman who had just walked through the door. Lieutenant Commander Emily Carter set her folder on the table at the front of the room with no ceremony whatsoever. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't make eye contact with the senior instructors seated in the first 2 rows. She didn't pause to let the room absorb her presence. She simply placed the folder down, smoothed one hand across the cover, and looked up. That was it. She was in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back cleanly, and a tactical uniform that bore no unit patches, no deployment insignia, no awards or citations of any kind. The uniform itself was regulation perfect, but stripped of everything that usually told a room who someone was. Which was the first thing that bothered Senior Chief Petty Officer Ryan Mitchell. He noticed it immediately, because Ryan Mitchell noticed everything. 22 years of service had rewired his brain that way. Threat assessment status, assessment, capability assessment, all running simultaneously and constantly, like background software that never closed. And what his internal software was telling him right now was this woman has no story on her uniform, which meant either she hadn't earned one, or she was hiding it. Ryan had dealt with both types before. The first type he had no patience for. The second type he didn't trust. He leaned toward the man sitting beside him, Master Chief Gerald Torres, 20 years and barrel-chested and quiet, in the way that only very dangerous men manage to be quiet. And he said low enough that it was meant to be private, but loud enough that it wasn't. Who the hell is she? Gerald didn't look at him. Read the brief. I read the brief. It said leadership assessment. It didn't say anything about sending someone who looks like she just finished her first deployment. She's a lieutenant commander. She's wearing a lieutenant commander's rank, Ryan said. That's not the same thing. That distinction mattered to Ryan Mitchell, the way it mattered to everyone in that room. These were men who had earned every stripe, every pin, every callus on their hands, and scar on their bodies through things that didn't get written into any brief that circulated through an administrative office. Rank without sacrifice was costume jewelry. It looked like the real thing until you got close enough to see it wasn't. Emily Carter hadn't looked up from her folder again. She was reading something or pretending to, or doing exactly what she intended to do, which was let the room settle into its own assumptions before she did anything to disrupt them. Ryan watched her for another 30 seconds. Then he made the mistake that would define the next 6 weeks of his professional life. He spoke up. Lieutenant Commander. She looked up. Her eyes were calm. Not blank, there was something behind them that registered everything, but the surface was completely still. You want to tell us what your operational background is? Ryan asked. Because this room has roughly 400 combined years of special operations experience sitting in it, and before we take a leadership assessment seriously, we'd like to know who's delivering it. The question was reasonable. The tone was not. Everyone in the room understood that. Ryan understood it too. He wasn't asking because he wanted information. He was asking because he wanted the room to see him ask, and he wanted her to have to answer him in front of 80 people who were already quietly aligned with his skepticism. Emily looked at him for a moment. Your concern is noted, Senior Chief. That's not an answer. No, she agreed. It isn't. She went back to her folder. The room made a sound that wasn't quite laughter and wasn't quite murmuring. It was something in between the collective exhale of men watching someone get handled in a way they hadn't anticipated, which created a strange mixture of amusement and unease. Ryan felt the unease more than the amusement, because people who deflected questions that cleanly were usually people who had very specific reasons for doing so. But he'd committed to this line, and Ryan Mitchell did not retreat. "Lieutenant Commander." His voice carried more edge this time. "I've been running training evolutions at this command for 9 years. I've had 3 evaluators come through in that time. Every one of them spent their first hour in this room telling us exactly who they were and what they'd done, because they knew this room doesn't respond well to credentials without context." He paused. "So I'll ask again. What's your operational background?" Emily closed the folder. She looked at Ryan Mitchell with the same steady calm she'd had since the moment she walked through the door. "What's yours?" she asked. The silence that followed was different from the one before. The one before had been anticipatory. This one had an edge to it. Ryan leaned back slightly in his chair. Around him, he could feel the room recalibrating men who had been quietly aligned with his posture, now doing the small internal math of wondering whether they'd aligned with the right person. 22 years, he said. 8 combat deployments, 2 silver stars. I've trained more operators than I can count, and the ones who made it home are alive because of what they learned in this room." "That's an impressive record," Emily said. "It is. And you think it authorizes you to speak to a superior officer the way you just spoke to me?" The question landed like a controlled detonation. Precise, limited, exactly calibrated to do a specific amount of damage. Not enough to blow the whole structure down, just enough to crack the foundation. Ryan's jaw tightened. "I think the room deserves a professional assessment," Emily said, "conducted by someone command selected and vetted and assigned to this post. What the room wants and what the room deserves are 2 different things." "Senior Chief, I'd think someone with 22 years would understand that distinction." She picked up her folder again. Ryan stared at her. Then he laughed. It came out of him the way something comes out of a person when they're not sure what else to do. A sharp, short burst of sound that he shaped into contempt before anyone could read it as surprise. "Lieutenant Commander?" He gestured at the rank on her collar with an open hand sweep that was almost theatrical in its dismissiveness. "Seriously, you want us to look at those oak leaves and believe you've earned them?" The room went very still, because that was a different kind of question. That wasn't pushback disguised as procedure. That was a direct challenge to her legitimacy spoken in front of 80 witnesses, and everyone in the room understood what Ryan was doing, and understood equally well that he had now crossed into territory where there was no graceful exit for either of them. Emily didn't react the way anyone expected. She didn't flush. She didn't stiffen. She didn't look around the room to gauge her support the way people do when they feel outnumbered. She didn't reach for anything authoritative in her bearing, didn't square her shoulders or lift her chin. She simply looked at Ryan Mitchell with the same expression she'd worn since she walked in, that surface-level calm that had something deeper moving underneath it. And she said, "You're right." Ryan blinked. "A rank means nothing." Her voice was quiet enough that the men in the back row leaned slightly forward. "Unless you understand what someone had to sacrifice to earn it." She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened the folder and began the briefing. Ryan Mitchell spent the rest of that morning in a state he was not accustomed to and did not enjoy off balance. He participated in the briefing. He answered the questions Emily directed at the room. He contributed exactly what professionalism required of him and nothing more. But in the back of his mind, beneath the operational layer that ran his day-to-day, something was turning over and over like a stone in a current. A rank means nothing, unless you understand what someone had to sacrifice to earn it. It was the kind of sentence that could mean almost anything. It could be an acknowledgement. Yes, you're right, I haven't earned this. Or it could be something else entirely. Something that turned the statement back on the person who'd challenged her, made them ask themselves whether they actually knew what she'd sacrificed. The ambiguity was the problem. Ryan didn't like ambiguity. He'd spent 22 years in an environment that punished ambiguity. You knew your mission or you didn't. You knew your team, or you didn't. You knew your enemy, or you paid for not knowing with something you couldn't get back. After the briefing concluded and the room dispersed for the day's first training evolution, Gerald Torres fell into step beside him on the way to the training compound. "You want to tell me what that was about?" Gerald asked. "Assessment of a situation," Ryan said. "It looked like something else." She walked in with no record on her uniform and no answers in her mouth. "In any other context, what would we call that?" "In any other context, we wouldn't have a lieutenant commander standing in front of us," Gerald said. "In this context, we have a superior officer assigned by command, and you spent the first 10 minutes of her briefing trying to find out if she was real. I spent the first 10 minutes asking a reasonable question." Ryan. Gerald's voice was level and final, the way it got when he was done framing things gently. "You laughed at her rank." Ryan stopped walking for just a half step, then continued. "The question about her background was legitimate. The laugh wasn't." Ryan didn't answer that. Gerald let the silence hold for a few seconds, then said, "She didn't answer you. That either means she can't or she won't. One of those is your concern. The other one should worry you a lot more." Ryan thought about that for the rest of the morning. The training evolution that day was a maritime interdiction drill. 3 teams of 12 candidates, each running coordinated scenarios across a shipboarding simulation that tested communication decision-making under pressure and the ability to adapt when the scenario deviated from the plan, which it always did, because Ryan made sure it always did. He ran these evolutions with a precision that had produced some of the best operators the command had seen. His methodology was built on a simple principle: you don't get to be comfortable. Comfort creates hesitation. Hesitation in a real environment gets people killed. So the training environment stripped comfort out at the root and replaced it with something harder and more reliable. The automatic instinctive response of a person who had been forced to function correctly under conditions that tried to make functioning impossible. It worked. His numbers proved it. His operators' mission success rates proved it. The men who came out of Ryan Mitchell's training program didn't freeze in the field because they had learned that freezing was not an option. Emily Carter stood at the observation platform above the training deck and watched in silence. She had a notepad. She used it occasionally, making small marks that Ryan couldn't read from his position below. Mostly she just watched. Ryan had expected her to ask questions, to insert herself into the evolution somehow the way evaluators usually did, interrupting the flow to request explanations, asking the instructors to justify decisions in real time, treating the training environment like a classroom rather than the closest thing to operational reality they could construct. She didn't do any of that. She watched, and the watching bothered him more than the questions would have, because you watched things you were trying to understand completely before you spoke about them. People who rushed to questions were covering gaps in their knowledge. People who watched were building a picture. The evolution ran for 3 hours. At the end of it, one of the candidates, a 24-year-old named Patterson, who had been in the program for 6 weeks and had consistently shown more raw physical capability than tactical judgment, made a decision that cost his team the simulation. He'd prioritized speed over confirmation, moved before his team was in position, and created an exposure that in a real environment would have resulted in multiple casualties. Ryan pulled Patterson aside immediately. "Walk me through what you were thinking," Ryan said. "I thought I had the angle, Senior Chief. The timing was right and I didn't want to—" "The timing was not right. Your team wasn't set." "I know, but I thought—" "If you thought the timing was right, Patterson, and your team wasn't set, then what you were actually doing was making a decision for 12 people based on one person's read. Do you understand what that means in the field?" Patterson's jaw tightened. "Yes, Senior Chief. Tell me." "It means people die." "It means people die," Ryan confirmed. His voice was not cruel, but it was absolutely without cushion. "You had the instinct. The instinct was good. Your execution of that instinct was not. Those are 2 different problems, and only one of them can be fixed. Are we clear?" "Yes, Senior Chief." "Get back to your team." Patterson moved off. Ryan turned and found Emily Carter standing 10 feet away. He didn't know how long she'd been there. "That candidate," she said. "Is he on the attrition list?" Ryan looked at her. "Not yet." "But you're considering it." "I'm considering a lot of things." Emily tilted her head slightly. "What specifically concerns you about him?" "His judgment under pressure is inconsistent. His instincts are there, but he breaks from his team when he gets into an elevated state. That's a pattern, not a one-time error." "How many times?" "Twice in the last 4 weeks. And the times he didn't break from his team." Ryan paused. "He performed well." "More than once. 4 or 5 times." "So the pattern is that he breaks when the pressure exceeds a specific threshold," Emily said, "and holds when it doesn't. Which means he breaks at exactly the moment it matters most." "Or it means he's still calibrating where that threshold is," she said. "Which is what training is for." Ryan felt the familiar tightening in his chest that had been building all morning. "Lieutenant Commander, I have been doing this for 9 years. I have seen this pattern before. I know what it produces." "What does it produce?" "Either a candidate who corrects it in training or a catastrophe in the field." "Then correct it in training," she said. "That's the job." "Some candidates can't be corrected." "Some can't," she agreed. "Have you determined that Patterson is one of them?" Ryan didn't answer right away. Emily let the silence sit without filling it. "Not yet," Ryan finally said. "Then he stays," Emily said simply. She looked at her notepad, made a small mark, and walked back toward the observation platform without another word. Ryan watched her go. Around him, 3 of his senior instructors were watching him watch her. He could feel it without turning around. He had known these men for years, had trained alongside them, had argued and agreed and eaten bad food in bad places, and trusted his life to them. And right now, he could feel the quality of their attention shifting in a way that he had never felt directed at him before. He turned around. The 3 instructors looked away at almost the same moment. Ryan said nothing, but he thought, "She's winning something. I'm not sure what, but she's winning it." That night, Ryan did something he rarely did. He looked someone up. Not through official channels, he didn't have the clearance access that would have given him what he actually wanted, and requesting it through official channels would have created a paper trail that announced exactly how unsettled he was, which was not something Ryan Mitchell was prepared to advertise. He went through the informal network instead. The web of contacts accumulated over 22 years, men who owed him favors. Men he'd served alongside, men at various commands and agencies who understood that information was a currency, and that professional courtesy was how you made deposits. He made 3 calls. The first 2 came back empty. Emily Carter's name returned nothing useful. No unit associations, no deployment records. Anyone would confirm, no shared service history with anyone in his network. The third call went to a man named Hargrove at a desk in a building in Langley, whose official title nobody mentioned out loud. Ryan had done him a significant professional favor 7 years ago, the kind of favor that didn't get forgotten. Hargrove listened to the name. There was a pause. Then Hargrove said, "Where did you say she was, Coronado?" "She came in as a leadership evaluator." Another pause. Longer this time. "Ryan," Hargrove said, and his voice had changed in a way that was small but unmistakable. The careful, deliberate tone of someone choosing exactly what to confirm and what to leave alone. "Leave that one alone." "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to know who I'm—" "I heard you," Hargrove said. "Leave it alone. That's my answer." He ended the call. Ryan sat in the quiet of his office for a long time after that. "Leave that one alone." Those words did not describe someone who had been handed a rank she hadn't earned. Those words described someone whose record existed in places that didn't show up in normal records. Ryan Mitchell had been in this world long enough to know the difference between those 2 things. And sitting in his office alone with the silence and the small cold feeling that had taken root somewhere behind his sternum, he understood that he had made a very significant error in judgment that morning. The question now was what to do about it. "I didn't do anything about it." Not right away. What Ryan Mitchell did instead was what he always did when a situation exceeded his immediate understanding. He worked. He threw himself into the next 3 days of training evolutions with the focused intensity that had built his reputation, pushing the candidates harder than the schedule technically required, running extended evolutions and layered scenarios that stressed every variable simultaneously. He told himself it was because the candidates needed it. He knew in the part of himself that didn't lie to him that he was burning energy he didn't know what else to do with. Emily Carter observed every evolution. She asked questions now, not the kind that interrupted or challenged, the kind that seemed genuinely aimed at understanding. She would wait until a break approached an instructor and ask something specific and quiet that didn't carry the weight of judgment, but pulled out the reasoning behind a decision. She asked Ryan's questions last always, and she never asked him anything she could have asked someone else. On the third day, she asked, "When a candidate fails the same evolution twice, what's your usual protocol?" "Evaluation," Ryan said. "Determine if the failure is correctable. If it is, we correct it. If it isn't, we cut them." "Who makes that determination?" "The senior instructor." "Always." "I consult the team." "But the final call is yours." "Yes." "What happens if you're wrong?" The question was simple. It had no edge to it. But it landed somewhere uncomfortable because Ryan had spent 22 years in an environment where being wrong was a thing that happened to other people, or at least that was the story he told himself. "We assess outcomes and adjust," he said. "Do you ever go back to a candidate you cut and wonder if the cut was correct?" Ryan looked at her. "I don't make cuts I'm not sure about." "I didn't ask if the cut was certain," Emily said. "I asked if you ever go back and wonder." The silence stretched out between them. Ryan said, "No." Emily wrote something in her notepad. Ryan said, "Does that concern you?" She looked up. "Should it?" He didn't answer. She capped her pen. "Senior chief, in 9 years of running training here, how many candidates have you cut?" "Somewhere between 200 and 250. I don't track the exact number." "And how many of those came back through another program and served operationally?" Ryan paused. This was a number he didn't actually know, and the fact that he didn't know it suddenly felt like something he should have known. I don't have that data." 31, Emily said. Ryan stared at her. "Command tracks it," she said. 31 operators currently serving in active roles were cut from this program. Some of them more than once. Several of them have significant operational records. 2 of them received the Navy Cross. She paused. 1 of them received the Medal of Honor. The number settled into the room like something heavy dropped onto a hard surface. Ryan said nothing. Emily said, "I'm not telling you those cuts were wrong. I'm telling you the picture is more complicated than a single data point." She picked up her notepad. "That's what assessments are for." She walked away. Ryan stood alone in the corridor for a full minute before he trusted himself to move, because somewhere behind the professional injury of what she'd just told him, something much harder was happening. The slow, reluctant fracture of a certainty he had built 22 years of identity on. And it hurt the way true things hurt when they arrive too late and all at once. On the 4th day, the training schedule included a leadership debriefing session, the kind of structured professional development evolution that Ryan Mitchell usually ran with clean efficiency and genuine expertise, because the classroom was one place where his communication skills were as sharp as his operational ones. He stood at the front of the room. Emily sat in the back. He delivered 30 minutes on decision architecture under stress, exactly the kind of content he had refined over years of teaching it material that had shaped the thinking of hundreds of operators who had taken it into the field and used it when it mattered. When he finished, Emily raised her hand. Ryan had not expected that. Evaluators didn't raise hands in his sessions. They observed. He recognized the move for what it was. He nodded at her. "You said that the optimal decision in a compromise scenario is the one that preserves the most assets and advances the primary objective," she said. "How do you define the primary objective when the primary objective conflicts with the welfare of the team?" The room shifted. Candidates and instructors alike felt the temperature change. The mission is the primary objective, Ryan said. The team exists to execute the mission. And when completing the mission costs the team, that's the nature of the work. Is it always? It's the reality of combat operations. It is, Emily agreed. And it's also the logic that applied too broadly produces command cultures where leaders don't report problems because problems look like failures, where operators hide injuries because injuries look like weakness, and where the people you need to tell you when something is wrong have learned that telling you costs them more than staying silent. She paused. Is that the team you're building here, Senior Chief? The room was absolutely still. Ryan's hands were flat on the podium. He looked at her, and for the first time in a very long time, perhaps the first time in his professional life, Ryan Mitchell had no answer. The silence stretched. It was the longest silence he had ever stood inside. And somewhere in the middle of it, he understood that the woman in the back of the room had not come to Coronado to embarrass him. She had come because something needed to change, and she had waited 4 days to say it directly, which meant she had spent 4 days making sure she understood exactly what it was. He closed the session. But the question she had asked stayed in the room long after everyone had left. The question Emily had left hanging in that classroom didn't dissolve when the room emptied. It followed Ryan Mitchell out the door, down the corridor, across the training compound, and into the next morning, like something he couldn't shake off his boots. Is that the team you're building here, Senior Chief? He'd spent 22 years never having to answer that question. I was still not answering it. But he was thinking about it. And for Ryan Mitchell, thinking about something he couldn't immediately resolve was its own particular brand of misery. Gerald Torres found him in the equipment bay at 0600, running a gear check that didn't need running. Everything had been checked the day before, and the day before that, because Ryan's program ran on a standard of preparation that left nothing to chance. Gerald knew that, which meant Gerald also knew that Ryan wasn't in the equipment bay because of the gear. You're early, Gerald said. I'm always early. You're earlier than always. Gerald leaned against the rack beside him. You want to talk about yesterday? Nothing to talk about. She asked you a question in front of the whole room, and you stood there for about 15 seconds without an answer, Gerald said. In 9 years, I have never seen you without an answer. I was considering the most accurate response. Ryan. What? Gerald looked at him with the particular patience of a man who had known him long enough to have run out of diplomatic approaches. She's not wrong. And you know she's not wrong. That's what's killing you. Ryan set down the piece of equipment in his hand. She came into this command 4 days ago. She has watched 12 training evolutions and 2 classroom sessions. She doesn't know what I know about this program, about these candidates, about what they're going to face when they leave here. No, Gerald agreed. But she knows something you've stopped seeing. Which is what? That some of these kids are terrified of you. The words landed flatly between them. Ryan said, Good. Not the terrified that makes you sharp, Gerald said. The other kind. The kind where a candidate won't tell you his shoulder has been wrong for 2 weeks because he'd rather blow it out completely in a real evolution than admit it in training. The kind where a guy swallows a judgment call he knows is bad because correcting it means admitting he was unsure, and being unsure means you cut him. He paused. We lost Daniels last year. Remember? Ryan's jaw tightened. That was a medical failure. It was a medical failure he didn't report because he didn't think he could. Gerald's voice was not accusatory. It was the voice of someone delivering a truth they had been carrying for a long time. He knew the standard. He knew what you expected. He decided that meeting the standard mattered more than telling someone something was wrong. That's not on him, Ryan. That's on the culture. The silence between them was the kind that held weight. Ryan picked up the piece of equipment again, put it back down, and said nothing. Gerald said, I called Hargrove last night. Ryan went still. Why? Because you called him 2 days ago, and I wanted to know what he told you. He didn't tell me anything. He told me the same thing he told you, Gerald said. He told me to leave it alone, and then he told me one other thing. Gerald paused. He said she went somewhere the rest of us have never been, and that the people who came back from that place don't talk about it, and the people who know about it don't either. Ryan stared at him. Where? Ryan asked. He didn't say. But the way he didn't say it told me enough. Gerald straightened up. She's not here to embarrass you. You understand that, right? If she wanted to embarrass you, she'd have done it on day one, in front of the room, with whatever's in that folder. She still might. She might, Gerald said, but she hasn't, which means she's trying to do something else. He started toward the door, then stopped without turning around. Maybe instead of trying to figure out who she is, you should start paying attention to what she's actually doing. He left. Ryan stood alone in the equipment bay for a long time. Then he went to find Emily Carter. She was in the observation area above the main training deck, reviewing something in her folder. She didn't look up when he approached, but the slight shift in her posture told him she'd registered his presence. He stood beside her without speaking for a moment. Then he said, "Yesterday, in the classroom." "Yes," she said without looking up. "The question you asked, about the team I'm building." He paused. "You think I've created an environment where operators are afraid to report problems?" "I think it's a possibility worth examining," she said. "Based on 4 days of observation." Based on 4 days and a personnel file 2 inches thick. She turned a page in the folder. "Your program produces exceptional operators, Senior Chief. Your mission outcome data is among the highest in the command. That's not in question. Then what is—" Emily looked up at him for the first time. "The ones who didn't make it through your program. I'm not talking about the ones who couldn't meet the physical standard. I'm talking about the ones who met every physical benchmark, every tactical requirement, and still got cut." She held his gaze. "Do you know where most of them went?" "Different programs. Some left service entirely. 17 of them are currently serving in other special operations commands. Combined, they have 43 commendations, 11 Valor Awards, and 2 are currently in senior leadership positions." She let that number sit for exactly the right amount of time. "They weren't failures, Senior Chief. They were people who didn't fit a specific culture. Yours." Ryan's hands tightened at his sides. "My culture produces results." "It does," she said. "And it also produces operators who hide things. Because the cost of being seen as uncertain in your program is higher than the cost of quietly managing a problem alone." She closed the folder. "That works fine until it doesn't. And when it stops working, it doesn't stop working a little bit. It stops working all at once." Ryan said, "Like Daniels." Something shifted in Emily's expression. Barely perceptible, but it was there. "Gerald told me," Ryan said. "He said Daniels didn't report his injury because he didn't think he could, because the culture said that admitting something was wrong meant you were wrong." He stopped. "I didn't know that, about Daniels. I was told it was a medical failure that presented without symptoms." "It was both," Emily said quietly. The weight of that landed somewhere deep in Ryan's chest and stayed there. He said, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Emily looked at him with something that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite challenge. "Why do you think—" He didn't answer. She didn't push. They stood together in silence for a moment that felt much longer than it was, and Ryan Mitchell, who had spent 22 years being the person in the room who always knew what to do next, found himself standing in territory he didn't have a map for. "What do you need from me?" he finally said. Emily picked up her folder. "I need you to watch today's evolution differently than you've been watching it." "Differently how?" "Don't watch for failure," she said. "Watch for what people do right before they almost fail. The half second before the error. The moment where someone makes a decision they're not confident in, but makes it anyway, because the alternative is admitting they're not confident." She paused. "That's where the information is," Ryan said. "And then what?" "Then we talk about what you saw," she said simply. "That's all." She walked past him toward the stairwell. And Ryan turned to watch her go, and something in the way she moved, not hurried, not performative, just deliberate in the way that people are deliberate when they know exactly what they're doing and why, made the cold feeling in his chest shift slightly. Not go away, but shift. He went to the training deck. He watched the evolution, and he watched it differently. The morning evolution ran 2 teams of 14 through a hostage extraction scenario, a drill Ryan had designed himself 3 years ago and refined through dozens of iterations into something that consistently produced high-stress decision points at unpredictable intervals. He knew it better than any other evolution in his program. He could watch it and call the inflection points before they arrived. He watched it differently now. He watched Patterson move through the approach phase with clean mechanics and sharp instincts, watched him lock into his sector with the kind of focus that came from genuine preparation, and then watched him reach the moment, the specific half-second Emily had described, where the scenario deviated from his expectation. Patterson's team moved left. The scenario shifted right. Patterson processed it in real time and made a call. The call was correct. But in the half-second before he made it, Ryan saw something he had never cataloged before. Patterson's eyes moved to his team leader, not to check a position, not to coordinate, to look for permission. A flicker of deference so fast it was almost invisible, but it was there, a young operator who could make the right call but needed someone else's face to confirm that making it was allowed. Ryan stood very still, because that wasn't a tactical problem. That was a cultural one. I watched 3 more candidates through the rest of the evolution with the same focused attention, and he saw the same thing in 2 of them. This tiny practiced hesitation that preceded every decision, this fractional second of checking in that shouldn't have been necessary and wouldn't have been necessary in an operator who trusted that making a call and being wrong was survivable. In Ryan Mitchell's program, being wrong was survivable. But being seen as uncertain was not. He had never understood until this moment that those were 2 different things. The evolution concluded. The candidates and instructors began the breakdown and debrief process. Ryan stepped back from the training deck and found Emily standing 6 feet to his left. She had been there for some time. He hadn't noticed. "You saw it," she said. It wasn't a question. "Patterson," Ryan said. "And 2 others." "Which 2? Kellerman and Diaz." Emily nodded slowly. "Those are 3 of the 5 I flagged." Ryan turned to look at her directly. "You already knew." "I suspected," she said. "I wanted to see if you could see it without me pointing to it." "Why did that matter?" She met his eyes. "Because if I point to it, it's my observation. If you see it yourself, it's your program." She paused. "One of those produces a report that goes to command and gets filed. The other one produces change." Ryan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What's wrong with a report that goes to command?" "Nothing," she said. "Unless the goal is actually fixing the problem instead of documenting it." The distinction hit him with more force than he expected, because it was exactly the distinction he had spent 22 years believing defined good leadership, not the paperwork, but the outcome. Not the process, but the result. He had believed that about himself and held everyone around him to it, and now someone was holding it back up to him and showing him where he'd stopped living it. He said, "The 5 you flagged, what happens to them?" "That depends on what you want to happen," Emily said. "I want to know if I can fix it." She studied him for a second. "Kellerman has been here 11 weeks. He is 4 days from a pass or cut decision. Patterson has 6 weeks left. Diaz has 8. She paused. "Kellerman is the one to start with. Whatever you do with him in the next 4 days is either going to confirm the pattern or begin breaking it." "What do I do with him?" Emily said. "Stop making it dangerous for him to be wrong." The simplicity of it was almost shocking. Ryan said, "I don't punish." "You don't punish mistakes," she said. "You punish uncertainty. There's a difference." She let that settle. In your program, a candidate can execute incorrectly and survive it if they execute with conviction. But a candidate who executes correctly while showing doubt is marked. They learn that. They learn it fast. And then they stop showing doubt even when doubt is the appropriate response. She tilted her head slightly. Doubt is data senior chief. In the right hands, it saves lives. In a culture that punishes it, it goes underground. And underground is exactly where you don't want it. Ryan said nothing for a long time. Then, "How do I fix that in 4 days with Kellerman?" Give him a scenario he can't execute with false conviction, she said. Make the correct answer something he has to admit uncertainty to reach. And when he admits it, when he says, I don't know, or I need input, reward it, visibly, in front of his team. That's going to look like I'm lowering the standard. Only to people who can't tell the difference between a standard and a performance, she said. Your operators will see it clearly. They see everything. She picked up her folder. They've been watching you for years, Senior Chief, much more carefully than you've been watching them. She walked off the training deck. Ryan stood where she'd left him. Sergeant Major Harlow, one of his senior instructors, 15 years and a man who said almost nothing unless it was worth saying, stepped up beside him. She's something, Harlow said quietly. Yeah, Ryan said. What did she say? Ryan looked at the training deck, still processing. She said they've been watching me more carefully than I've been watching them. Harlow made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Hell, Ryan, I could have told you that 3 years ago. Ryan looked at him. Why didn't you? Harlow met his eyes. Same reason Patterson looks at his team leader before he makes a call. He paused. Same reason none of us said anything about Daniels until it was too late. He walked away. Ryan Mitchell stood alone on the edge of the training deck and felt 22 years of certainty quietly reorganizing itself into something he didn't have a name for yet. He ran the Kellerman evolution 2 days later. He designed it himself overnight, built it around a scenario that had no clean answer, a 3-point extraction with deteriorating intelligence, and a window that closed faster than the team could confirm all 3 positions with certainty. The correct play was to stop, admit incomplete information, and request verification. Any operator who pushed through with false confidence would blow the extraction. Any operator who admitted uncertainty and called for confirmation would preserve it. He'd never run a scenario designed to reward uncertainty before. He stood back and watched. Kellerman reached the decision point 7 minutes in. The scenario degraded exactly as designed. Kellerman's read on the situation was solid up to the final approach, and then the intelligence shifted, and he was standing in the middle of an evolution with 14 men waiting on his call, and the honest answer was he didn't have enough to proceed. Ryan watched Kellerman's face. He watched the exact sequence Emily had described, the training instinct that said, push through, followed by the cultural instinct that said, don't show doubt, followed by the actual truth of the situation, which was that he didn't know and he needed to say so. Kellerman said, I don't have confirmation on position 3, holding for verification. The evolution stopped. In the past, that would have been a failure point. Ryan would have stepped in, identified the hold as hesitation, and marked it accordingly. Instead, he said clearly, loudly enough for the entire team to hear, good call. Incomplete information means hold. Every time. That's leadership. 14 operators on that training deck went completely still for a fraction of a second, because in 11 weeks they had never heard Ryan Mitchell say those words in that sequence. Kellerman looked at him with an expression that contained too many things to separate. Surprise, relief, a flash of something that might have been emotion quickly controlled, and underneath all of it, the careful expression of someone who couldn't quite trust what they'd just heard. Ryan said it again, in case it hadn't landed. Incomplete information means hold. Kellerman made the right call. He looked at the team. 14 faces. Most of them carefully neutral, the way operators' faces got when they were processing something they hadn't expected. But in several of them, in the ones who had been here long enough to have learned the real rules of this program, something else was happening. Something that looked to Ryan's newly calibrated eye like a very small and very cautious breath of relief. He noted that. He noted it carefully. The evolution continued. The team completed it successfully. In the debrief, Ryan did something else he had never done. He asked Kellerman to walk the team through his decision process at the hold point. Not to critique it, to let the team hear it. Kellerman talked for 4 minutes, uncertain at first words, careful and slightly hedged, because 11 weeks of programming didn't dissolve in a single evolution. But as he described the moment, the shift in intelligence, the honest assessment, the decision to stop, his voice steadied. And when he finished, Ryan said, That's the job. Knowing what you know and being honest about what you don't. Any questions for Kellerman? The room was quiet for a second. Then Patterson raised his hand. Ryan nodded at him. How did you decide to call the hold? Patterson asked Kellerman. Like, how did you know it was okay to... The question was technically about Kellerman, but Ryan understood what it was really asking. And Kellerman, to his credit, understood it too. I didn't know it was okay, Kellerman said. I just decided the right call mattered more than looking like I had it together. He paused. I figured if I was wrong, I'd rather be wrong saying I didn't have enough than wrong because I pretended I did. The room absorbed that. Ryan let it sit. Then he dismissed the debrief and walked out into the corridor, and Emily Carter was standing there, not like she'd been waiting, but like she'd simply arrived at the right moment, which he was beginning to understand was a thing she did with unsettling consistency. How'd it go? She asked. Patterson asked Kellerman how he knew it was okay to call the hold, Ryan said. Emily's expression shifted slightly. What did Kellerman say? Ryan told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that's the sentence that changes a culture. Not a policy, not a debrief format. A candidate telling another candidate that the right call mattered more than looking like he had it together. She paused. That's what you built today. Ryan said, one evolution. One evolution, she agreed. But it's a start. He looked at her. You've done this before. This specific thing going into a command and changing something that the command didn't know needed changing. She didn't answer immediately. Have you? He pressed. Emily said, the commands that need it most are usually the ones that believe they need it least. That's not an answer. No, she said. It isn't. She walked down the corridor, and Ryan watched her go, and the frustration he'd carried since day one was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't the frustration of a man who had been challenged by someone he thought wasn't qualified to challenge him. It was the frustration of a man who was beginning to understand that she was exactly as qualified as whatever Hargrove had refused to confirm on the phone, and that the silence around her record wasn't absence. It was the loudest thing in the room. He went back to his office, sat down, and opened the personnel file the command had provided when she was assigned. He'd read it on day one and found it thin to the point of uselessness. Basic service information. The assignment order. A clean evaluation record that said exceptional without explaining why. He read it again now. And this time, instead of looking for what was there, he looked for what wasn't. No unit designations that matched any conventional deployment structure he recognized. Evaluation periods that corresponded to gaps in the public operational record. Times and places that if you knew how to read a file, the way Ryan Mitchell knew how to read a file, pointed toward the kind of work that didn't get written down in the way other work got written down. 3 years of her record corresponded to a period he knew not in detail, but in outline as one of the most operationally demanding windows a special operations asset could have worked through. He knew because he had friends who'd been adjacent to it. Not in it. Adjacent. Nobody who had been in it talked about it. He closed the file. He sat back in his chair. And he thought about the sentence she'd said on the very first day in front of 80 men who were laughing at her rank. A rank means nothing, unless you understand what someone had to sacrifice to earn it. He understood now that she hadn't been defending herself. She'd been describing herself. And the understanding arrived the way all the significant understandings of his career had arrived, not as a revelation, but as something that had been sitting directly in front of him the entire time, patient and completely still, waiting for him to be ready to see it. The next morning, when he walked into the training compound, 3 of his senior instructors were standing in a group near the entrance. They stopped talking when they saw him. The silence was different from the silence of men who had nothing to say. It was the silence of men who had been saying something and stopped. Ryan looked at them. Harlow said, "Good debrief yesterday." Ryan said, "Something you want to add to that?" Harlow glanced at the other 2, then back. "We've been talking about the Daniels thing, about how some of the things Emily, the lieutenant commander, has been saying track against things we've noticed for a while but didn't." He stopped. Didn't bring up. "Why not?" Ryan said. "Because..." Harlow stopped again, and something crossed his face that Ryan recognized with a slow, uncomfortable jolt of clarity. The same micro-expression he'd seen on Patterson's face before a decision. The careful, practiced neutrality of a person calculating whether the truth was safe to say. In his senior instructor. A man with 15 years of service who had stood beside Ryan Mitchell through hundreds of evolutions, who still in this moment was running the same silent calculation as a candidate in week 6. Ryan said, "Harlow, say it." Harlow said, "Because you don't love hearing things that go against what you've built." The words were quiet and precise and honest in the way that only things held back for a long time could be when they finally came out. Ryan stood with them for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me." Harlow told him. The other two added their pieces. What came out over the next 40 minutes was not a catalog of failures or a case against Ryan's program. It was something more uncomfortable than that. It was a picture of a culture that had calcified around one man's certainty until the certainty itself had become the walls, and everything that needed air to grow had slowly, quietly stopped growing. Ryan listened. He didn't defend himself. He didn't interrupt. He listened the way Emily Carter had listened on her first day, completely without performance, absorbing rather than responding. When they finished, he said, "Why are you telling me this now?" Harlow said, "Because of what you did in that debrief with Kellerman." He paused. "We figured if you could hear it from a candidate, maybe you could hear it from us." Ryan nodded slowly. He said, "From now on, I need you to tell me. When you see something I'm not seeing. When the culture is doing something I'm not aware of." He paused. "I need it to be safe to tell me. I'm making it safe right now in front of all three of you. That's a standing order." The three men looked at him. Then Harlow said quietly, "Yes, Senior Chief." And the way he said it, with a relief that was too deep to be about anything recent, told Ryan everything he needed to know about how long this particular silence had been waiting to end. He walked to the training deck. Emily was already there. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Ryan took up his position for the morning evolution, and the work continued, and the unit moved into the third day of something that had no name yet, but was already quietly and irrevocably becoming different. The change didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with a memo, or a formation, or a speech. It arrived the way real change always arrives in places like this. Slowly, then, all at once, in the space between one decision and the next, in the half-second before a call gets made, and the quality of the silence that follows it. Ryan Mitchell felt it first in the morning briefings. Something was different in the room. Not louder, not more relaxed. Just different in the way a room feels when people inside it are allowing themselves to take up slightly more space than they were before. Candidates asked questions they wouldn't have asked 2 weeks ago. Not challenging questions. Not the kind that tested authority. The kind that came from genuine uncertainty, offered without the careful packaging that uncertainty usually got wrapped in before it was considered safe to present to Ryan Mitchell. He answered them directly. Everyone. No edge. No implication that the question revealed a weakness in the person asking. Just the answer, and occasionally a follow-up that pushed the candidate to work through the reasoning themselves. Harlow watched this from the back of the room on the third morning and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. He just watched the way you watch something you weren't sure you'd ever see, with the specific attention of someone who intends to remember it accurately. Emily Carter was not in those morning briefings. She had shifted her observation pattern in the second week. Less time on the training deck. More time in the offices and corridors and informal spaces where the culture actually lived between evolutions. Ryan noticed her absence and understood it. She wasn't watching the performances anymore. She was watching what happened when nobody thought they were being watched. That told him something about her methodology. It also told him she was thorough in a way that made him quietly uncomfortable, because if she was watching the informal spaces, she was seeing things that the formal record would never capture. The side conversations, the small daily transactions of power and deference that added up over weeks and months into the culture that Harlow had described to him, and that Ryan was only now fully seeing for what it was. On the 9th day of her assessment, Emily requested a private meeting. Ryan arrived at the small conference room she'd been using as a working space to find her seated at the table with the folder open and 3 pages of notes laid out in a neat row in front of her. She gestured to the chair across from her without preamble. He sat. "I want to show you something," she said, and slid the first page across the table. It was a data summary. Candidate performance metrics cross-referenced with specific instructors, specific evolution types, and specific decision points. Ryan read it with the speed of someone who had spent years learning to extract meaning from numbers fast. What it showed was a pattern. Not the pattern he expected. Not a simple correlation between Ryan's evolutions and candidate failure rates. More specific than that. The data showed that candidates performed at their highest levels during evolutions, where the evaluating instructor had previously modeled uncertainty in some visible form. And they performed at their lowest, not in execution, but in decision quality, during evolutions, where the evaluating standard had been purely outcome-based, no tolerance for visible doubt. Ryan read it twice. "This is from this program," he asked. "The last 3 years," Emily said. "I requested the raw evaluation data from command before I arrived." "You came here with this." "I came here with the hypothesis," she said. "The data confirmed it. But data isn't the same as understanding the mechanism." She paused. "I needed to see the mechanism operating." Ryan set the page down. "That's why you didn't tell me what you were actually looking for. If I'd told you on day 1, you'd have adjusted your behavior around my observation," she said. "That's human. That's not a criticism. But it would have contaminated the baseline." Ryan looked at her. "You let me behave exactly the way I would normally behave, including that first morning." "Yes?" "You let me laugh at you in front of 80 people." A beat of silence. "Yes," Emily said. The word landed simply without drama, and that simplicity was somehow more powerful than any version of it with emotion attached would have been. She had walked into that room on day 1, knowing she was going to be challenged, knowing she was going to be dismissed, knowing that the easiest response, showing credentials, asserting authority, establishing herself through the things she'd done that nobody in that room could match, would have been available to her. She hadn't taken it, because taking it would have changed the room, and she needed to see the room unchanged. Ryan said, "Who sent you here?" "I told you, command." "Not command's official answer," Ryan said. "Who specifically? Who looked at this program and decided to send you?" Emily held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "Admiral Reyes." Ryan went still. "Vice Admiral Catherine Reyes." The name sat in Ryan's chest, with the weight of an entire career's worth of context attached to it. Reyes had built her reputation over 30 years as someone who saw problems in organizations before the organizations knew they had them, and who sent exactly the right person to deal with them in exactly the right way. She was not a political operator. She was not someone who used assessments as performance theater. When Reyes sent someone somewhere, it meant she already knew what they were going to find. She just needed it confirmed and addressed by someone she trusted to do both. "Reyes has been watching this program," Ryan said. It wasn't a question. "Reyes watches everything that produces the kind of numbers your program produces," Emily said. "Exceptional outcomes draw attention. But the question Reyes always asks isn't just what the numbers say. It's what the numbers cost." Ryan absorbed that. "Daniels," he said. "Daniels was the trigger," Emily said. "Not the only data point, but the one that made the question impossible to defer." Ryan leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. In 22 years, Admiral Reyes had never directed specific attention at his program. He had taken that as confirmation that he was doing things right. He understood now with the cold clarity of someone receiving information. They should have understood much earlier that absence of attention from Reyes was not the same as approval from Reyes. She had simply been watching from a distance that felt like indifference and was actually patience. He said, "What happens now?" "That depends on what you do with what you know," Emily said. "I write an assessment. The assessment goes to Reyes. What's in it is determined by what I've observed." She paused. Ryan, I need to ask you something directly. It was the first time she'd used his first name. He noticed it. She intended him to. Ask, he said. The night of day 2, she said. You called someone about me. Ryan said nothing. Hargrove, she said. The name hit him like cold water. I'm not asking you to confirm it, Emily said. I'm telling you I know because you need to understand something about the position you were in and the position you're in now. She set her pen down. What Hargrove told you, or specifically what he didn't tell you, was accurate. There are parts of my record that don't exist in any file you could access. And I'm not going to tell you what they are. Not because I don't trust you with the information. Because the information is not what this assignment is about. She looked at him steadily. But I need to know that you understand this. I did not come here to establish my credentials. I came here to do a job. And the job matters more than whether you respect me. Ryan said, I respect you. That's recent, she said. Yes, he said. It is. Something in her expression acknowledged that with a precision that was neither warm nor cold. It was simply accurate. I know, she said. And I'm telling you that the respect is not the point. The job is the point. Are we aligned on that? We're aligned, Ryan said. Emily nodded and picked her pen back up. Then let's talk about the second half of this assessment because what I've seen in the last 9 days has shifted the picture considerably. And there are things I need you to walk me through directly. She slid the second page across the table. Ryan read it. And the professional part of his brain, the part that had been doing this work for 22 years, registered immediately that what she was showing him was no longer just the past. This page was about the next 4 weeks. About specific candidates and specific evolutions and specific decision points that were coming, not ones that had already been logged. She wasn't just assessing, she was building. You're going to run parallel evolutions, he said, reading. Same scenarios, different evaluative framing. I want to test whether the changes you've started making in the last week produce measurable differences in candidate behavior at the decision points we've already mapped, she said. Not over months, over the next 4 weeks. If the culture shift produces the result, the data suggests it should, we'll see it in the numbers before this assessment closes. And if it doesn't, then the assessment reflects that, she said, and Reyes decides what comes next. Ryan read the rest of the page. His eyes stopped halfway down. You've listed Kellerman as the primary case study. Kellerman's pass or cut decision is in 3 weeks, Emily said. That's our primary measurement point. Whatever culture the program has in 3 weeks, the one you're actively building right now is the culture Kellerman makes his final decisions inside of. His performance will tell us whether the shift is real or surface. Ryan set the page down. You're betting the assessment on one candidate. I'm not betting anything, she said. Kellerman is a data point, one of several. But he's the clearest because his timeline is fixed and his baseline is documented. He's the same person he was 5 weeks ago. What's changed is the environment he's operating in. She paused. If Kellerman performs the way I believe he's capable of performing it, won't be because his skills improved in 3 weeks. It'll be because the environment stopped punishing him for what he already was. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and if Kellerman fails? Emily looked at him. Then we figure out whether the failure was Kellerman or the environment. Those are 2 different answers, and they lead to 2 different responses. The difference matters. Ryan thought about Patterson's question in the debrief. How did you know it was okay? And Kellerman's answer. I figured if I was wrong, I'd rather be wrong saying I didn't have enough. He said, he's going to pass. Emily said, why do you believe that? Because I've been watching him wrong for 6 weeks, Ryan said. And now I'm watching him right. And what I'm seeing is someone who has exactly what this program is supposed to produce. He just couldn't show it in the environment I'd built. He paused. That's on me. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Write that down somewhere, she said quietly. Not for the assessment, for yourself. The specific moment you understood that the words you just used. Write them down. Ryan looked at her. Why? Because you're going to need to say them out loud to other people at some point. And the first time you say something that hard, it helps to have practiced the exact words. He didn't respond immediately. She was already moving to the third page. The second week of the parallel evolution structure brought something Ryan hadn't anticipated: resistance. Not from the candidates, from two of his senior instructors. Chief Warrant Officer Briggs had been running evolutions at Coronado for 7 years. He was technically excellent, methodologically rigid, and personally loyal to Ryan, in the way that people who have built their professional identity alongside someone else's professional identity are loyal not just to the person, but to the system the person represented, because the system was the foundation their own identity stood on. Briggs came to Ryan's office on a Tuesday morning with an expression that said he'd been working up to this for several days. "The Kellerman evolution yesterday," Briggs said. "What about it? You told him a hold was the right call, in front of his team. You told him stopping to ask for more information was leadership." "It was the right call," Ryan said. "It sets a precedent," Briggs said. "Candidates in the field don't always get to hold. Sometimes the window closes and the information isn't coming, and you move or you lose the op." He paused. "If we train them to think a hold is leadership, we're training them to hesitate." Ryan said, "There's a difference between hesitation and assessment." "In training, maybe," Briggs said. "In the field, the difference is a half-second you don't have." Ryan looked at him. Kellerman's scenario had the time. The intelligence was actively deteriorating. A push-through with incomplete information would have blown the extraction. He made the correct tactical call, and he made it by accurately assessing what he knew and what he didn't. He paused. "That's not hesitation, Briggs. That's the job." Briggs said, "The way you framed it rewarded stopping. That's what the candidates heard." "What I framed it as," Ryan said carefully, "was accurate information about what leadership looks like at a specific decision point. Leadership sometimes means moving with incomplete information. Leadership sometimes means holding for more. The skill is knowing which situation you're in." He paused. "We've been training one and calling it both. That's the problem." Briggs was quiet for a moment. His expression hadn't changed much, still the careful set quality of a man maintaining a position, but something behind it was moving. Ryan recognized it because he'd been living inside the same movement for 9 days. "You're changing things," Briggs said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation with an open question inside it. "Some things," Ryan said. "Because of her. Because of what she showed me," Ryan said. "That's different from because of her." Briggs said, "What did she show you?" And Ryan told him. The same data Emily had laid out on the table. The correlation between modeled uncertainty and decision quality. The 31 operators who'd been cut from this program and gone on to serve with distinction. The number Briggs didn't know. The number Ryan hadn't known either. Briggs listened with the same focused attention he brought to everything. When Ryan finished, Briggs said, 31. 31, Ryan confirmed. Briggs sat with that number. "How many of those were mine?" Ryan had asked Emily that question the previous evening. 7. Something crossed Briggs's face. Not guilt exactly. Something older and quieter than guilt. The specific feeling of a person. Understanding that they have been building something they believed in, and finding out that the building had a structural flaw they didn't design and didn't know about, and could not now unknow about. 7 operators, Briggs said. 7 operators who are currently serving, Ryan said. Successfully, some with significant records. Briggs was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" It was the same question Ryan had asked Emily. He recognized it as the question that people asked when they were done defending and ready to work. "I need you to run the parallel evolution with Diaz on Thursday," Ryan said. "Exactly the way we discussed. Framing open evaluation focused on decision quality, not just decision speed. And when Diaz makes a call, you can defend it in front of the team, regardless of what the call is." Briggs nodded slowly. "And if the call is wrong?" "Then you explain why it's wrong and what the right call would have been," Ryan said. But you don't mark the uncertainty as the failure. You mark the execution. Those are two different grades. Briggs stood up. He looked at Ryan with an expression that was difficult to read in its complexity. Something between the respect of a long-serving professional and the discomfort of a man adjusting to a floor that had shifted under him. "This feels like we're making it softer," Briggs said. "It's not softer," Ryan said. "It's harder. It's harder to be honest about what you don't know than to pretend you know everything. We've been training for the second thing and calling it the first." He paused. "Try the Thursday evolution. See what Diaz does." Briggs left. Ryan sat in his office for a moment, then picked up his phone and called Gerald Torres. Gerald picked up on the second ring. "Talk to me." "Briggs just came in," Ryan said. "How'd it go?" "He's on board. Skeptical, but on board." "That's Briggs," Gerald said. "He leads with skepticism and follows with complete commitment. Always has." A pause. "What about the second resistant instructor?" "Haven't talked to him yet." "You should do it today," Gerald said. "Harmon's already talking to some of the candidates, quietly, framing the changes as a loss of standard." Ryan went still. "How do you know that?" "Patterson told me," Gerald said. "Patterson came to me this morning, which I want to point out is the same Patterson who 3 weeks ago would never have come to a senior instructor with something like this, because the cost was too high. He came to me, told me what he heard, and asked me directly whether the standard was being lowered." A pause. "I told him no, but you need to talk to Harmon before this becomes a thing." Ryan said, "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Gerald said. "Thank whatever you've been doing differently for the last week that made Patterson think it was safe to come tell me." He ended the call. Ryan found Harmon in the equipment room 20 minutes later. Harmon was a solid instructor and a harder personality than Briggs. More closed, more certain, the kind of certain that had never been seriously tested by the right information at the right time. He was Ryan from 5 years ago in some ways. Ryan recognized it clearly enough that it was uncomfortable. "Harmon," Ryan said, "I heard you've been talking to candidates about the changes in evaluation framing." Harmon turned around. He didn't look guilty. He looked like someone who had expected this conversation and had decided in advance how to handle it. "I've been answering their questions," he said. "They're confused." "What are they confused about?" "Whether the standard still means the same thing it meant 3 weeks ago." "And what did you tell them?" "I told them the standard is the standard," Harmon said. "That what they're seeing in some evolutions is an adjustment in framing, not an adjustment in what we expect from them." Ryan said, "That's accurate." "I know it's accurate," Harmon said. "But what I didn't tell them, what I'm telling you, is that I don't think the framing adjustment is neutral. I think it changes what candidates believe is acceptable. And I think that has consequences we're not fully accounting for." "Explain," Ryan said. Harmon crossed his arms. "You've been here 9 years. You know what this program produces because you've watched it produce it. The operators who come out of here the best ones are the ones who've been stripped down to something essential. No performance, no cushion, no safety net. Just them and the decision and the consequence." He paused. "When you tell a candidate that admitting uncertainty is leadership, you're giving them a safety net. And some of them are going to use that net when they shouldn't, in the field that costs lives." Ryan said, "And when you tell a candidate that admitting uncertainty is weakness, they stop telling you when something is wrong. And that also costs lives." He paused. "We lost Daniels Harmon." Harmon's jaw tightened. Daniels didn't report a condition that was developing for 2 weeks, Ryan said. "Because he made the calculation that reporting it cost more than managing it alone. That's not a medical failure. That's a cultural one. And the culture that produced it is the one we built." He let that land. "Both of us. Together. Over years." Harmon was quiet. Ryan said, "I'm not lowering the standard. I'm correcting a flaw in how we've been applying it. You're one of the best instructors in this command, and I need you with me on this, not running a parallel narrative to the candidates." He paused. "But I need you to actually believe it, not just comply. So I'm asking you to think about it honestly and come back to me." "What if I think about it and I still disagree?" "Then you come back and tell me why," Ryan said. "Specifically, with examples. And we work through it, He paused. That's how this works now. Harmon stared at him. Something shifted in his face. Not capitulation, but a kind of surprise that was almost more interesting than agreement. Because he had clearly expected Ryan to handle this the old way. The direct authority-based way that didn't invite disagreement, it simply absorbed or removed it. This was not the old way. Okay, Harmon said finally. Okay, you'll think about it. Okay, I'll think about it. And okay. He stopped, started again. Okay, it's possible I've been framing it wrong to the candidates. Ryan said, talk to Patterson directly. Tell him what I told you about the standard. He deserves to hear it clearly. Harmon nodded. Ryan left the equipment room and walked directly to the training deck where Emily was running what she called a quiet observation, standing still in a space where candidates passed through, not obviously watching anything, just present in a way that her weeks of presence had made seem entirely normal. So normal that candidates moved around her without adjusting their behavior. She was watching everything. Ryan stood beside her. Harmon, he said. I know, she said. You heard. I've been watching him since day 3, she said. He's not wrong about the risk. The risk is real. Operators who learn that uncertainty is always acceptable can drift toward using uncertainty as an avoidance strategy. It's a legitimate concern. She paused. He's wrong about the solution, but the concern itself is legitimate. That's what I was going to tell him, Ryan said. I know, she said again. Ryan looked at her sidelong. You know a lot of things before I say them. You're predictable in the ways that good leaders are predictable, she said. You see the accurate thing and you move toward it. The path changes, the direction doesn't. Ryan absorbed that. Is that in the assessment? He asked. Emily almost smiled. Almost. Some version of it, she said. The training deck was filling with the afternoon evolution group. 15 candidates running a communications drill that required real-time coordination across 3 separate positions. Standard evolution. Nothing designed. Just the daily work of the program running on its ordinary rhythms. Ryan watched it. And somewhere in the middle of watching it, something shifted in the room. Candidate Reeves, 23 years old, 11 weeks, and someone Ryan had privately marked as a borderline cut 2 weeks ago because of communication failures under pressure, was at the central coordination point of the drill. The scenario ran a feed degradation on his primary communication channel. Standard test point. Ryan had seen it run 50 times. Reeves called out immediately loudly, without a beat of hesitation. I've lost primary feed. Switching to secondary. Team 1, confirm your position. Textbook response. Clean, fast, no hesitation. 6 weeks ago, Reeves would have spent 12 seconds attempting to restore the primary before acknowledging the degradation, because acknowledging a technical failure, even a designed one, even a test, felt like admitting something. Ryan had watched him do it twice. Today, he didn't. Today he called it immediately and redirected. Ryan said nothing. He simply watched. Emily said very quietly beside him, That's Reeves. I know, Ryan said. 2 weeks ago he would have... I know, Ryan said. The drill continued. Reeves maintained communication across the secondary channel with a clarity and efficiency that Ryan logged automatically, not as a surprising result, but as confirmation. The candidate hadn't changed. What he was operating inside of had changed. Ryan turned to Emily. I need to know something, he said. She looked at him. When Reyes sent you here, he said, did she know it would take this long to get through to me? Emily held his gaze for a moment. Then, she said it would take about 9 days. Ryan stared at her. She knows you, Emily said. She's known you a long time. She said you'd push back hard, and then you'd look at the data, and then you'd start moving. She paused. She was 2 days off. You started moving on day 11. That doesn't bother you, Ryan said. Being sent somewhere to wait out someone's resistance. The resistance wasn't the problem, Emily said. The resistance was you being thorough. I'd have been more concerned if you'd changed immediately. She paused. Leaders who change on day 1 without understanding why are the ones who change back on day 30. Ryan looked at the training deck. Reeves was wrapping the drill. His team completed the evolution with clean efficiency, and in the debrief circle that formed automatically at the end, a ritual Ryan had established years ago, the communication breakdown was the first thing Reeves raised himself. Not defensively, analytically. He walked his team through the degradation, the decision to switch the secondary channel management, and asked if anyone had seen a better play. 2 candidates offered thoughts. Reeves listened. Ryan watched the entire exchange from 20 feet away and felt something happen in his chest that he did not have precise language for. Not pride exactly. Not relief. Something quieter than both of those and more permanent. The feeling of something being built correctly after a long period of building it wrong. He turned to Emily. 3 weeks ago, he said, I was running this program the way I believed was right. I was certain I was right. I had 22 years of data telling me I was right. He stopped. How many programs like this are out there, run by people like me with 22 years of data, who are wrong in the same specific way, and don't have someone like you walking through the door? Emily was quiet for a moment. More than there should be, she said. And Reyes sends you to all of them. Reyes sends people she trusts, Emily said. I'm one of several. How long have you been doing this specific work? She said, long enough. Ryan looked at her. That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm giving, she said. Not unkindly, not evasively. The way a person answers when the specific number is less important than what the number would imply, and they're not ready to imply it. Ryan nodded. He understood. He looked back at the training deck. Reeves's team had broken the debrief circle and was moving to the next station. Clean, coordinated communicating in the easy shorthand of people who trusted each other enough to speak in half sentences. Ryan said, Kellerman's final evaluation is in 11 days. 10, Emily said. 10, he corrected. And whatever happens in those 10 days, whatever the assessment says, whatever Reyes decides, I want you to know something. Emily waited. What you showed me, Ryan said. Not just the data, the way you did it. Walking in without your record on your sleeve and letting me be exactly who I was and watching what it produced. He paused. That took something I don't have a word for. I spent 9 days trying to figure out what you'd done and why it was working, and I think the answer is just you knew what you were doing was more important than whether I understood it. Emily said nothing for a moment. Then, the operators in this program deserve a culture that doesn't cost them things they can't afford to lose, she said. Whatever it takes to build that is worth doing. Ryan said, even being laughed at on day 1. Especially that, she said quietly. She turned and walked back toward the observation platform, and Ryan stood on the training deck and watched his candidates move through their work. And somewhere in the distance between who he'd been on day 1 and who he was standing here now, something had closed. Not completely, not without cost, but closed in the way that wounds close, not back to what they were before, but sealed into something new, something that would hold. He pulled out his notepad. He found a blank page. He wrote down exactly what he'd said to Emily in the conference room that morning, the specific words the way he'd said them, the thing he'd understood. The environment stopped punishing him for what he already was. He stared at the sentence. Then he wrote one more line underneath it. That was the job. I just forgot. He closed the notepad and went back to work. 10 days. That was what Ryan had left. 10 days until Kellerman's final evaluation. 10 days until Emily's assessment closed. 10 days until whatever Reyes decided landed on this program like a verdict. Ryan had spent 22 years not thinking in terms of verdicts. He ran a program. The program produced results. The results spoke. That was the entire architecture of his professional certainty, and it had held without examination for so long that he'd stopped being able to see it as architecture at all. It had just become the ground he stood on. Now the ground had a shape he could see, and seeing it meant he couldn't unsee it. He ran the morning evolution on day 1 of the final 10, with a focus that was different from his usual focus, not sharper exactly, but wider. He was watching more variables simultaneously than he'd allowed himself to watch before, because before, he'd been filtering out the ones that didn't fit the model. Now the model was bigger. It held more. It was less clean, less certain, harder to operate inside of, and better. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly better in the way that accurate things are better than comfortable ones, even when accurate is harder to live with. Kellerman ran the morning scenario clean. Not perfect, his secondary communication timing was off by 4 seconds at the midpoint, which Ryan noted and would address in debrief, but clean in the ways that mattered. Decision clarity, team coordination. The specific quality of calm under pressure that separated operators who had genuinely internalized the work from operators who were performing their internalization for an evaluating audience. Kellerman was not performing. Ryan knew the difference now with a precision he hadn't had 3 weeks ago. After the evolution in the debrief, Ryan addressed the timing issue directly. Kellerman, secondary comm at the midpoint. Walk me through the delay. Kellerman said, I hesitated. I had the secondary ready, but I waited to confirm primary was fully degraded before I switched. Cost me 4 seconds. Why did you wait? I wanted to be certain before I announced the switch, Kellerman said. So the team didn't get 2 calls in rapid sequence. Ryan looked at him. That's a judgment call. In this scenario, with this team configuration, was it the right one? Kellerman thought about it. Genuinely thought about it. Ryan could see the actual processing happening rather than the performance of processing. No, Kellerman said. 4 seconds was too long. The right call was to switch at 2 seconds and trust the team to track the transition. Why? Because they're trained for it, Kellerman said. I was managing something they didn't need me to manage. Ryan said correct. He looked at the team. Kellerman identified his own error, diagnosed the mechanism, and described the correct play. That's the standard. Everybody clear. 14 nods. Clean, efficient, done. 6 weeks ago, that debrief would have run differently. The error would have been identified by Ryan, the diagnosis delivered as a correction, and Kellerman would have received it with the careful neutrality of a man absorbing a lesson he wasn't permitted to have feelings about. The information would have been the same. The outcome would have been smaller. Gerald Torres appeared at Ryan's shoulder as the candidates dispersed. 9 more days, Gerald said. I know. She's writing the assessment in sections, Gerald said. Harlow saw her working on it last night in the conference room. Looked like she'd been at it for hours. Ryan said, she's thorough. Harlow said it looked like more than an assessment, Gerald said. It looked like a case. Ryan went still. A case for what? That's what I'm asking you. Ryan thought about it. An assessment documented what existed. A case argued for something. The distinction was significant. She hasn't said anything to me about it. Would she? Gerald asked. Before it was finished. Ryan didn't answer because the answer was no, and they both knew it. Emily operated on the principle that information presented before it was complete was information that could be adjusted by the response to it. She would show him the finished thing, not the work in progress. He found her in the conference room that evening. She looked up when he entered. She didn't close the folder in front of her, which told him she wasn't keeping it from him. He sat down across from her. Gerald says it looks like a case, not just an assessment. Emily considered this for a moment. Gerald's perceptive. What are you building a case for? She set her pen down. I want to propose a modified evaluation architecture for this program going forward. Not just a correction of existing practices, a structural change in how decisions get made at critical points. She paused. I need Reyes to approve it. To approve it, I need more than data showing the current system has flaws. I need to demonstrate an alternative that produces better outcomes. She paused again. Kellerman is part of that demonstration. Ryan leaned forward. What kind of structural change? Dual evaluation at cut decisions, Emily said. Right now, the final call is one person's judgment, yours or whichever senior instructor is assigned. I want to propose a 2-voice confirmation for any cut in the final 4 weeks of a candidate's program, the primary instructor and an independent evaluator who reviews the same data and makes a separate determination. She paused. If they agree, the cut stands. If they disagree, there's a mandatory review period before the decision is made. Ryan stared at her. That's a significant process change. Yes. It slows down decision-making at critical junctures. By a maximum of 72 hours, she said, which is worth it if it prevents cutting an operator who would have served with distinction, which based on the data it would have done in at least 11 of the 31 cases we've already discussed. Ryan sat back. You think I'll oppose this? I thought you would have 3 weeks ago, Emily said. I don't know what you think now. That's why I'm telling you. He was quiet for a moment. Then, who would the independent evaluator be? Someone outside the program's chain, Emily said. A senior operator with no direct stake in the candidate's outcome, rotated for each decision. It could be gamed, Ryan said. You find an evaluator you know will agree with you, and you bring them in. The assignment would be command-controlled, Emily said, not instructor-selected. Ryan thought through the mechanics. He could see the objections clearly, the ones Briggs would raise, the ones Harmon would raise, the ones he himself would have raised 3 weeks ago, with complete conviction. Process creates bureaucracy. Bureaucracy creates hesitation. Hesitation costs lives. The argument was not wrong, it was just incomplete. The candidates who were cut incorrectly, Ryan said. The 11. Were they cut in the final 4 weeks? Emily said. 9 of the 11. Yes. 9 out of 11 in the window, where a second voice would have been required. Ryan did the math in his head. 9 operators with documented service records, Valor Awards, command positions. 9 people who had sat where Kellerman was sitting now and been sent home by a single voice that was certain. He said, "Put it in the case." Emily looked at him. "Put the dual evaluation proposal in the case," Ryan said. "I'll support it when Reyes asks." Something moved in Emily's expression. Not surprise. She was past being surprised by him. But something that registered the moment accurately with the particular attention that significant moments deserved. "That will carry weight," she said. "Coming from you." "That's why I'm saying it," Ryan said. "Don't waste it." She picked up her pen. He left the conference room and walked out into the night air and stood there for a moment with the specific feeling of a man who has just done something he couldn't have done 3 weeks ago and is not entirely sure whether to be proud of that or troubled by the fact that 3 weeks ago was how recent it was. He decided on both. Day 4 of the final 10 brought the crisis nobody had designed. It arrived at 0730 in the form of Chief Warrant Officer Briggs appearing in Ryan's office doorway with an expression that had moved past concern into something harder and more immediate. "Candidate Torres," Briggs said. "Marcus Torres, not Gerald the candidate." "What happened?" "He's been hiding a knee injury," Briggs said. "Harmon caught it this morning during the physical assessment. Marcus has been compensating for at least a week, maybe longer." Ryan was on his feet before Briggs finished the sentence. Marcus Torres was 25 years old, 9 weeks into the program, and one of the most naturally gifted candidates Ryan had seen in 3 years. Not in raw physical metrics, there were candidates stronger, faster, with better baseline numbers. But in the specific combination of instinct, adaptability, and interpersonal intelligence that made the difference between an operator and an exceptional operator. Ryan had been watching him since week 2 with the quiet attention he reserved for candidates who had something rare. He found Marcus in the medical room with the unit's physician, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, running an assessment. Marcus was sitting very still, with the particular stillness of someone managing pain, and the expression of someone who has been caught at something and is calculating how bad the consequence is going to be. Ryan stood in the doorway. Marcus looked at him. Hayes said, "Lateral knee ligament, moderate strain. He's been running on it for at least 8 days." Ryan said, "Leave us." Hayes looked at him, then at Marcus, then nodded and stepped out. The room was quiet. Ryan pulled a chair from the corner, turned it around and sat on it backward with his arms across the back. Not a posture of authority, just a posture. Something that said, "This is a conversation, not an execution." Marcus said, "I know what you're going to say." "Tell me why you didn't report it," Ryan said. "Because—" Marcus stopped, started again. "Because I was 6 weeks from a past decision, and I didn't want to get medically deferred." "You knew a deferral wasn't a cut." "I knew it wasn't technically a cut," Marcus said. But guys who get deferred. He stopped again. Finish it, Ryan said. Guys who get deferred don't always come back, Marcus said. They lose their spot. They come back to a new group. The instructors who knew them are gone. The momentum is gone. It's technically not a cut, but it feels like one, and sometimes it becomes one. He looked at Ryan directly. I didn't think I could afford to report it. Ryan sat with that. He sat with it the way he'd been learning to sit with things in the last 3 weeks, not rushing to respond, not filling the silence with authority. Just letting the truth of what Marcus had said be exactly what it was. Marcus had made a calculation. The same calculation Daniels had made. The specific, trained, entirely rational calculation of a person operating in a culture where the cost of honesty exceeded the cost of silence. And Marcus had done it here in this program, in the 3 weeks since Ryan had started changing things, which meant the culture was still present in the bones of the place, even as the surface was shifting. Change on the surface. The bones take longer. Ryan said, You're right that deferment doesn't always lead back in. That's a real risk, and I'm not going to tell you it isn't. He paused. I'm going to tell you something else. If you'd blown that knee out completely in an evolution, if you'd been running compromised for 8 days, and it failed under full load, in a scenario, the consequences would have been medical, operational, and potentially permanent. Not just for you. For whoever was counting on you at that moment. Marcus was quiet. I also want to tell you something about this program, Ryan said. And the next part was harder to say than anything he'd said in 3 weeks, because it required him to say something true about a failure that was his, and give it to a candidate who deserved to hear it. The reason you didn't think you could afford to report it, that's not your failure, that's mine. I built a culture where you learned that honesty had a higher cost than silence, and I'm in the process of changing that. But the bones of a culture don't change in 3 weeks. You were running on 8-day-old instincts about what was safe to say, and those instincts came from me. He paused. I'm sorry for that. Marcus stared at him. The expression on his face moved through several things. Quickly surprised confusion, the careful reassessment of someone who has been handed information that doesn't match the architecture of what they expected, and settled into something that was very close to the expression of a person trying not to show that they are affected. He was affected, deeply. What happens now? Marcus asked. Hayes defers you for the minimum recovery period, Ryan said. You come back to this group, not a new one. Your spot is held. Your timeline adjusts. He paused. And when you come back, you tell me immediately if something is wrong. That's not a suggestion. That's a standing order. Marcus said, Senior Chief. That's the deal, Ryan said. That's how this works now. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Ryan stood up, replaced the chair, and walked to the door. Then he stopped without turning around. Torres. You were right that you have something rare. I want you to know I see it. I've seen it since week 2. A deferred recovery doesn't change that. He walked out. In the corridor, Emily was standing 6 feet from the medical room door. Ryan looked at her. You heard? I was walking past, she said. Sure you were, he said. It wasn't accusatory, it was almost something else. Emily said, You told him it was your failure. It was. You told a candidate directly that something negative in his experience of this program was your responsibility. Ryan looked at her. You're going to write that down. I already did, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. How's that section of the case looking? Emily said, stronger every day. She turned and walked down the corridor, and Ryan watched her go, and thought about how different that sentence would have sounded 11 days ago, when stronger every day would have been a threat, and now it was something else. Something that felt cautiously, and without complete certainty, like progress. Day 6 brought Gerald Torres to Ryan's office at lunchtime with an expression that said the news he was carrying was not the easy kind. Ryan waved him in. Gerald closed the door. Harmon, Gerald said. What now? He went to Briggs this morning, Gerald said. He wants to formally object to the dual evaluation proposal. Ryan set down his pen. How does he know about the dual evaluation proposal? Gerald said nothing. Ryan said, Who told him? I don't know, Gerald said. But he knows the framework, not just the concept. He knows the specifics. Ryan thought about who had access to the specifics. Himself. Emily. Briggs, because Ryan had run the mechanics past him 2 days ago, testing the objections. And theoretically, anyone who had been in the conference room when the document was open. Harmon's objection, Ryan said. What's the basis? He says it undermines instructor authority at the most critical decision point in the program, Gerald said. He says if candidates learn that cut decisions can be reviewed and overturned, they'll use the review process as an appeal mechanism. They'll perform for the review instead of performing for the program. Ryan said, that's not a baseless concern. No, Gerald said. But it's also not the whole picture. Tell Harmon I want to see him, Ryan said. Today, before the afternoon evolution. Gerald left. Ryan picked his pen back up, put it down again, and instead went to find Emily. He found her in the conference room with the folder closed and her hands flat on the table, which meant she was thinking rather than working. He'd learned to read the difference. He told her about Harmon. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, he's going to escalate. Ryan said, you think so? I think he's a person who believes very strongly in something that has genuinely served this program well for a long time, Emily said. And he's watching it change in ways he didn't authorize and doesn't fully trust. And at some point, people in that position stop trying to change things internally and start looking for an external lever. She paused. Who does Harmon know at command? Ryan thought about it. He has a relationship with Captain Decker. They came up together. Decker is 2 levels below Reyes. Yes. If Harmon goes to Decker with a formal objection to the assessment process before the assessment is complete. Emily said, Decker has the authority to pause the evaluation pending a review, which would delay the case reaching Reyes by a minimum of 3 weeks. Ryan said, after Kellerman's decision. After Kellerman's decision, Emily confirmed. Which means the primary case study for the dual evaluation proposal gets decided under the old architecture. And if Kellerman passes, which I believe he will, it happens without the proposed structure in place to document how it happened. She paused. It doesn't kill the case, but it weakens it. Ryan said, what do you need from me? Have the conversation with Harmon, Emily said. Directly, not as his superior officer, as someone who has been where he is. She looked at him steadily. You were Harmon 3 weeks ago. You know what moved you. Try that. Ryan found Harmon in the corridor outside the training deck 30 minutes before the afternoon evolution. He didn't take him to an office. He kept it in the corridor, kept it moving, kept it between them, without the formality of furniture and closed doors. You want to file an objection, Ryan said. Harmon said, I think the proposal is wrong. Tell me specifically. Harmon did. He laid it out with the same precise competence he brought to everything, the concern about the review process being used as an appeal mechanism. The concern about instructor authority being effectively suspended at the highest stakes moment. The concern that command oversight in individual cut decisions created a precedent that could expand beyond special operations into other evaluation contexts. Ryan listened. He listened completely, the way Emily had listened to him. The way Kellerman had listened to Patterson, the way the culture was slowly learning to listen, not for the weakness in the argument, but for what the argument was actually made of. When Harmon finished, Ryan said, You're not wrong. Harmon blinked. Those risks are real, Ryan said. The review as appeal concern is the most serious one, and Emily knows it. It's addressed in the structure, command-controlled assignment, 72-hour maximum window, no candidate notification, until after the decision is finalized. It doesn't eliminate the risk, but it manages it significantly. He paused. The authority concern I understand differently now than I would have 3 weeks ago. How? Harmon asked. Because I spent 22 years believing that the authority of this program's decisions was its greatest strength, Ryan said. One voice, complete certainty, no ambiguity. And I was right that it produced strength. I was wrong that it produced only strength. He paused. 11 operators, Harmon. 9 of them cut in the final 4 weeks. Those cuts were made with complete authority and complete certainty by instructors who cared about this program as much as you do, and they were wrong. Harmon said you cannot know they were wrong. Their subsequent service records suggest strongly that they were, Ryan said. That's not proof, it's evidence. And evidence that 11 people with that kind of subsequent record were cut from this program. In the final weeks, is evidence worth building a structural response to? He paused. I know you disagree with the response. What I'm asking you is whether you've considered that the thing you're defending might have a cost you haven't fully accounted for. Harmon was quiet. Ryan said, I hadn't accounted for it, not fully, not until someone put the numbers in front of me and made me look at them directly. He paused. I'm asking you to look at them directly before you take this to Decker. The name landed between them. Harmon's expression shifted a fractional adjustment that told Ryan Gerald's intelligence had been accurate and that Harmon had at least considered the escalation. If you go to Decker, Ryan said, you have the right to do that. I'm not asking you not to. I'm asking you to make sure you understand exactly what you're objecting to before you do it. Because once that process starts, it affects more than the proposal. It affects what we're building here. Right now, in the next 6 days. Harmon said, what are you building? Ryan said, something better than what we had. He stopped. I know that's not a specific answer. I know you want a specific answer. The specific answer is, we're building a program that produces the same operators. This program has always produced without cutting the ones we shouldn't have cut, and without creating a culture where people hide things until the hiding kills them. He held Harmon's gaze. Daniels deserved better than what we gave him. So did the 11. So do the candidates running evolutions on this deck right now. He paused. Give me 6 days. Come to the Kellerman evaluation, see what it produces, and then decide what you want to do. Harmon looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, 6 days. 6 days, Ryan said. He walked to the training deck. Emily was already there. She didn't ask how it went. She read it in the way he moved, the way he took up his position, the specific quality of his attention as the afternoon evolution began. The evolution ran 2 hours. It was a night simulation drill, reduced visibility communication constraints. A scenario built around a multi-team coordination problem that required every candidate to make at least 3 independent decisions without direct instructor guidance. Ryan watched it differently than he would have watched it 6 weeks ago. He watched the decisions, but he watched the space before the decisions, the half-second that Emily had described the moment of calculation. He watched it in 15 candidates, simultaneously tracking the pattern across the group, and what he saw was uneven in exactly the way that genuine change is uneven. Some candidates operated with a new quality, the clean, honest quality of people who had started to trust that uncertainty was survivable. Others still showed the micro-hesitation, the checking in the performance of confidence over the reality of uncertainty. The program was not fixed. It was fixing. Those were different things, and Ryan understood the difference with a precision he hadn't had before. He understood it the way you understand the difference between a wound closing and a wound healed. One is process, the other is outcome, and confusing them gets you hurt. At the end of the evolution in the final debrief, a candidate named Okafor raised his hand without being called on. Ryan looked at him. During the third decision point, Okafor said, I made a call I wasn't confident in. I pushed through because the window was closing, and I didn't want to hold the team. He paused. The call worked, but I want to say in the debrief that it was less certain than it looked, because I think that matters. The room went still. Ryan looked at Okafor for a moment. Okafor had never done this before. Had never voluntarily introduced uncertainty into a debrief where the outcome had been successful. He had no reason to. The evolution was done. The decision had worked. He could have said nothing and been marked clean. He had chosen to say something anyway, because he had learned somewhere in the last 3 weeks in the accumulated weight of Kellerman's debrief, and Patterson's question, and Reeves's communication call, and every small visible moment where honesty had been met with something other than cost, he had learned that this room was changing. Ryan said, Okafor, that's the standard. Outcome and process are both data. Thank you for giving us both. Okafor nodded. Around him the room breathed. Ryan looked at Emily across the debrief circle. She was writing in her notepad. He knew what she was writing. He turned back to the candidates and closed the debrief, and the day ended, the way the best days ended, not with triumph, not with resolution, but with the quiet, accumulated weight of a program that was becoming something better than it had been. One decision at a time in the hands of people who were learning that honesty was not a liability, but the most essential tool they carried. 6 days until Kellerman. 6 days until the case went to Reyes. 6 days until everything. Ryan Mitchell had built the old version, and the new one stood in front of a judgment he couldn't control and couldn't predict and had to trust anyway. He walked off the training deck alone and didn't look back. The morning of Kellerman's final evaluation, Ryan Mitchell arrived at the training compound 40 minutes before anyone else, not because he needed the time to prepare. The evolution was designed. The scenarios were set. His instructors knew their positions. Everything that could be controlled had been controlled with the same meticulous preparation that had defined his program for 9 years. He arrived early because he needed 40 minutes inside the silence of a place that was about to become something other than what it had been, and he wanted to feel the weight of that before the day made it official. He stood in the empty training deck and thought about Daniels. He did this deliberately, the way you press a bruise to understand its depth, not for punishment, but for accuracy. Daniels had died believing that the program he served inside of had no room for the truth of what was happening to him. That belief had been correct. Ryan had built the thing Daniels believed, and Daniels had been right to believe it, and a man was gone because of it. Ryan held that for exactly as long as it needed to be held. Then he thought about Kellerman, about Patterson, about Marcus Torres sitting in medical deferment right now, healing a knee he'd run on for 8 days because the culture had told him silence was safer than honesty. About Okafor raising his hand in a debrief to offer uncertainty nobody asked for because he'd learned the room was changing. About 31 operators with Valor Awards and command positions who had sat where Kellerman was sitting today and been sent home by a single voice. He thought about all of it. Then he got to work. The candidates arrived at 0600. Kellerman was in the third group through the briefing room door, not first, not last. The specific positioning of someone who had learned not to perform either eagerness or restraint. He looked focused, not tight. There was a difference, and Ryan saw it clearly. Briggs ran the first portion of the morning evaluation. Ryan had designed it that way deliberately. He wanted Kellerman's first hour in the hands of someone whose opinion of this candidate had shifted over the last 3 weeks. Someone who could see clearly what was actually there, rather than the filtered version the old culture would have presented. Briggs ran the navigation and communications section with clean precision and debriefed it with the new framing decision quality. Not just decision speed. Uncertainty acknowledged and examined rather than penalized. Ryan observed from the platform above. Kellerman moved through the first section with a steadiness that was almost quiet in its competence. Not flashy, not performing. Simply executing, making calls, self-correcting twice in real time, without prompting. And at the third decision point, when the scenario introduced a variable that hadn't been in the brief, calling a hold, confirming his team's positions, and then proceeding with the adjusted information. The hold took 9 seconds. 9 seconds in a training scenario was nothing. 9 seconds in a real environment could be everything. The skill was knowing which situation demanded which response, and Kellerman had made that determination correctly. Briggs said nothing in the moment. He logged it. The debrief would address it. Ryan came down from the platform at the midpoint break. Emily was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. "First section," she said. "Clean," Ryan said. "Better than clean." The hold at point 3 was correct, and he knew it was correct, and he made it without looking at anyone for confirmation. Emily wrote something brief in her notepad. "Where's Harmon?" Ryan asked. He hadn't seen him on the deck this morning. Emily said, "He came to me last night." Ryan stopped. "What?" "He came to the conference room around 2100, she said. "He wanted to read the dual evaluation proposal in full. The complete framework, not the summary you'd given him." She paused. "I let him read it." Ryan stared at her. "And he read it for about an hour," Emily said. "Asked 3 questions. The third one was about the 11 operators specifically. whether the data showed any pattern in the type of error that led to their cuts, whether the cuts were driven by performance data or instructor perception. Ryan went still, because that was a very specific question. That was the question of someone who was no longer arguing against the framework and had started trying to understand it. "What did you tell him?" Ryan asked. "The truth," Emily said. 6 of the 11 were cut on instructor perception at decision points where the performance data was ambiguous. The instructor read uncertainty as incapability. The data didn't support that reading. It just supported the instructor's existing assessment. She paused. Harmon was quiet for a long time after that. "What did he say?" Emily looked at Ryan carefully. "He said he'd cut 2 candidates in the last year on perception at ambiguous decision points, and that he wanted to know if either of them were in the 6. Ryan felt something move through him that didn't have a clean name. "Were they one of them?" Emily said. The silence between them held all of that. Ryan said, "Where is he now?" "He asked to observe Kellerman's evaluation," Emily said. "I put him on the north platform." Ryan looked up at the north platform. Harmon was there, standing alone, arms at his sides, watching the training deck with the focused attention of a man who had arrived at a question he intended to stay inside until he understood it. Ryan said nothing. He went back to the training deck. The second section of Kellerman's evaluation was Ryan's. He'd designed this section himself, built it around the specific variables that had historically revealed the gap between performance and genuine capability. The scenarios where candidates who were performing confidence broke, and candidates who had internalized the work held. He ran IT hard, not unfairly, but with the full weight of what this program demanded at its best, which was considerable and unapologetic, and exactly what every person on this deck had signed up for. Kellerman held through the first scenario. Clean decision architecture communication, precise leadership of his 4-person subteam, natural rather than performed. He held through the second. The scenario introduced a communication blackout that lasted 3 minutes, requiring the team to operate on the last confirmed information while managing a moving situation. Kellerman distributed authority correctly, not centralizing all decisions in himself, not abdicating either, finding the exact balance that the scenario demanded. The third scenario was the one Ryan had built specifically for this evaluation. It had no clean answer. It was designed that way on purpose, a situation where the variables were genuinely unresolvable, with the available information, where the correct call was, to acknowledge that no correct call existed, and request guidance from a higher authority, rather than execute on false certainty. Every candidate who had run this scenario in the past had pushed through. Every single one, because the culture had told them that requesting guidance was weakness. That a leader who couldn't resolve a situation independently wasn't a leader. That the appearance of certainty was more important than the accuracy of the decision. Ryan had designed the scenario 3 years ago as a test of decisiveness under pressure. I understood now with the full and painful clarity of what the last 4 weeks had taught him, that he had actually been testing whether candidates had learned to perform certainty they didn't have. And he had rewarded the performance and called it leadership. Kellerman reached the unresolvable point 45 seconds into the third scenario. Ryan watched him, watched the processing happen. The variables assessed. The options evaluated. The honest moment of recognition, when Kellerman understood that the information he had was insufficient for a correct, independent decision. The half-second. Ryan held his breath. Kellerman said, "I don't have enough to call this correctly. I need command guidance before I execute." He looked at his team. "Hold position. Maintain security. I'm requesting an upward decision." Ryan exhaled, not with relief, with something deeper than relief. The specific feeling of a thing being done correctly after a long time of watching it done wrong. The feeling of a program producing exactly what it was supposed to produce, and knowing for the first time that the production was real. He let the scenario run for 20 more seconds. Then he stepped in. "Evolution complete," he said. The training deck went quiet. Ryan looked at Kellerman. He looked at the team. He looked at the 16 candidates and 6 instructors who had watched this evaluation run and were now waiting for the debrief. He said, Kellerman just made the most important call of this evolution. He let that sit for a moment. Requesting command guidance when the information is insufficient is not weakness, Ryan said. It is the single most difficult call a leader makes because it requires honesty about the limits of what you know in a culture that has historically rewarded pretending you know more than you do. He paused. Kellerman didn't pretend. He assessed accurately, acknowledged the limit, and protected his team from a decision made on false certainty. That's the standard. The deck was absolutely still. Ryan said, "Any questions about what you just saw?" 3 hands went up. He answered all 3. In the old program, the debrief of a final evaluation didn't run that way. It was a verdict delivered, not a discussion opened. Ryan saw the difference clearly and didn't comment on it. He just ran the debrief the new way, which was also the right way. And the silence that followed each exchange was the silence of people learning something rather than absorbing something. When it ended, Kellerman stayed behind. Everyone else filed out. Kellerman stood on the training deck with the careful composure of someone who wanted to say something and wasn't sure of the protocol for saying it. Ryan waited. Kellerman said, "Senior Chief, is there a decision?" "You passed," Ryan said. "You've passed for 3 weeks. Today confirmed it." Kellerman stood with that for a moment. Then, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "The third scenario," Kellerman said. "The one with no clean answer. Did you design it that way? On purpose?" Ryan said, "Yes." "Was it always designed that way?" Ryan paused. "The scenario has always had no clean answer," he said. "What's changed is what the right response to no clean answer looks like." Kellerman thought about that. What was the right response before? Ryan looked at him directly. Before, the right response was to push through with whatever you had and commit to the decision completely. Decisiveness over accuracy. Kellerman was quiet for a moment. "And the candidates who did that, who pushed through, did they pass?" Ryan said, "Most of them." Kellerman nodded slowly. Something moved across his face. Not resentment, not confusion. Something more complicated than both. The expression of a person understanding that the system they have been navigating has been more arbitrary than they were told, and deciding what to do with that understanding. He said, "What changed?" Ryan said, "Someone showed me the cost of what I built." Kellerman looked at him. "The lieutenant commander?" "Yes." Kellerman was quiet for another moment. Then, "I heard what you said. To Torres, the candidate. That the culture was your failure, not his." He paused. "I've never heard a senior instructor say that to a candidate before." Ryan said, "I know." "It mattered," Kellerman said. "To Torres, to everyone who heard about it." He paused again. "It mattered to me." Ryan said, "Good. Go find your team." Kellerman nodded. He turned to leave, then stopped. "Senior Chief, thank you for changing what it was safe to be in here." He left. Ryan stood alone on the training deck for a moment. Then he walked to the conference room. Emily was there. The folder was closed. All 3 pages were stacked neatly in the center of the table. She was sitting with her hands folded on top of them, which was the posture of someone who had finished a thing. Ryan sat across from her. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she said. "How long before it goes to Reyes?" "I transmit it tonight," Emily said. "She'll have it in the morning. I expect a response within 48 hours. Ryan said, "What does it say?" Emily looked at him. "It says the program produces exceptional operators. It says the program has operated with a cultural flaw that has produced measurable costs, including direct personnel loss and the incorrect attrition of 11 operators with documented subsequent records of distinction. It says that flaw is in active remediation under the leadership of the primary instructor who identified the problem, acknowledged it publicly, and has demonstrated a genuine and structural commitment to correcting it." She paused. "It says the dual evaluation proposal should be approved and implemented within 90 days. Ryan said, "And Kellerman." "Kellerman is the primary case study," Emily said. "His final evaluation result and the specific decision at the third scenario point are documented in full." The case argues that his performance today was only possible because of the cultural shift of the preceding 4 weeks, and that without that shift, he would have pushed through the third scenario and been evaluated incorrectly as having performed well. She paused. It argues that the old architecture would have produced the wrong result for the right-seeming reasons. And that's the clearest possible demonstration of why the architecture needed to change. Ryan absorbed all of it. Then he said, Harmon. Harmon is in the assessment, Emily said. Not as a problem, as a data point about the complexity of culture change. A committed, skilled instructor whose initial resistance was legitimate, and who, when presented with complete information, demonstrated the intellectual honesty to revise his position. She paused. That matters. It shows the change isn't dependent on one person. It's taking root. Ryan said, You could have made this harder for him, for all of us. Yes, Emily said. Why didn't you? She looked at him steadily. Because the goal was never to document failure. The goal was to build something better. She paused. You can't build something better in a place where the people inside it feel like they lost. You need them to feel like they found something. She tilted her head slightly. Did it feel like losing? Ryan thought about it honestly. Parts of it did, he said. The beginning. When I understood how wrong I'd been about specific things, specific people. He paused. Daniels felt like losing. Because it was. Yes, Emily said quietly. That one stays. The silence between them was different from every other silence they'd shared. Not charged, not careful, not navigating anything. Just two people sitting in the aftermath of something that had cost what it needed to cost and produced what they'd hoped it would produce. Ryan said, What happens to you now after this? Emily said, Another assignment. Where? I don't know yet, she said. Reyes decides. Another program like this one? Probably, she said. There's no shortage of them. Ryan looked at the folder on the table. You'll walk in and they'll laugh at you, or dismiss you, or challenge you in the first 10 minutes. Usually, she said. And you'll let them, Ryan said. Because you need to see the baseline. Because I need to see the baseline, she confirmed. Ryan looked at her. How many times have you done this? Emily said. Enough that I know the ones who change and the ones who don't within the first 3 days. Which did I look like? She almost smiled. The same almost as before, the controlled, precise expression that was as close as she got. You looked like someone who cared more about being right than about being correct, she said. Those are different things. People who care about being right protect the position. People who care about being correct follow the evidence. She paused. By day 4, you were following the evidence. I knew then. Ryan said, What did you know? That this was going to work, she said simply. He nodded. Then he said the thing he'd been carrying for 4 weeks, the thing that had been building since the phone call with Hargrove, and the data on the 31 operators, and the morning in the equipment bay, when Gerald had told him to pay attention to what she was actually doing. The first day, Ryan said, when I laughed, in front of the room. He stopped. I owe you an apology, a real one. Not a professional acknowledgement of an error in judgment. An actual apology from one person to another for something I did that was wrong. Emily looked at him. I looked at you and decided who you were before you said a single word, Ryan said. I decided your rank was unearned. Your presence was illegitimate, and your silence was evidence of exactly what I'd already decided it was. And I said so loudly in front of 80 people because I had 22 years of authority telling me I could. He paused. That was wrong. It had nothing to do with assessment standards or unit culture or professional challenge. It was wrong the way simple things are wrong, one person treating another person as less than they were. He held her gaze. I'm sorry. The room was very quiet. Emily held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, I know. 2 words. No performance around them. No deflection. No gracious minimizing. No professional reframing of the personal content into something more manageable. Just the direct receipt of an honest thing, given back with the same honesty it was offered with. She picked up the folder. She stood up. "Ryan," she said, and it was the second time she'd used his first name. He counted them. "What you built here over the last 4 weeks, it matters more than the 22 years. Not because the 22 years were wrong in everything, but because what you did with what you learned here is the hardest thing a leader does." She paused. "Most people don't do it. Not really. Not all the way through to the public acknowledgement and the structural change and the apology to the candidate in the medical room." She paused one more time. "You did." She walked to the door. Ryan said, "One more thing." She stopped. "Day 1, he said. "When you said a rank means nothing unless you know what someone had to sacrifice to earn it." He paused. "What did you sacrifice to earn yours? The record nobody talks about." Emily stood with her back to him for a moment. Then she turned around. She looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not the controlled calm, not the precise attention, not the almost smile. Something older than all of those. Something that had been carried a long time. She said, "People I couldn't bring home." She held his gaze for exactly the right amount of time. Then she left. Ryan stood in the empty conference room for a long time after that. He stood with the weight of those 5 words, and understood that they were the entire answer, and the entire reason, and the entire explanation for everything she had been since the moment she walked through the door. The silence, the patience, the willingness to be laughed at, the absolute refusal to defend herself with the one thing that would have ended all of it immediately, her record, her sacrifice, her cost. She hadn't used it because it wasn't a weapon. It was a wound, and she had carried it into this room and done the work anyway, because the work was the only thing that made the wound mean something. Ryan picked up his notepad. He found the page where he'd written the 2 lines after the Kellerman debrief weeks ago. The environment stopped punishing him for what he already was. That was the job. I just forgot. He read them. Then he turned to a new page and wrote one more thing. Not for the assessment. Not for Reyes. For himself, and for anyone who would ever stand where he stood, and face what he had faced, and have to decide what kind of leader they were going to be when the evidence arrived. He wrote, "She walked in alone and changed everything. Not because she was the strongest person in the room, because she was willing to be the most honest one." He closed the notepad. He walked out to the training deck. His instructors were already there. Briggs on the left, Gerald in the center, Harlow by the door, and Harmon on the right, in the position he always took, the specific spot he had stood in for 7 years, standing in it now with a different quality of presence than he'd had 4 weeks ago. Not diminished, deepened. The candidates filed in for the afternoon evolution. Kellerman was among them, no longer being evaluated but present, because passing didn't mean leaving immediately. It meant continuing until the program released you, and Kellerman had apparently decided to be exactly where the work was happening. Ryan looked at his team. He looked at the candidates. He thought about Reyes reading the assessment in the morning, and the 48 hours before her response arrived, and the 90 days after that, when the dual evaluation architecture would be implemented, and the candidates who would pass through this program in the years ahead, inside a structure that was more honest than the one they'd replaced. I thought about Marcus Torres healing a knee in medical deferment, coming back to this group, to this program, carrying the thing Ryan had said to him in that room, "That's on me," as proof that the culture had changed, and the change was real, and the cost of honesty was no longer higher than the cost of silence. He thought about 31 operators who had been sent home by a single voice and gone on to earn Valor Awards and command positions, and 1 Medal of Honor, and the candidates in the years ahead who would not be sent home the same way because the architecture would not allow a single voice to be the only voice. He thought about Emily Carter walking out of this building and into the next one, the next program, the next room full of operators who would look at her rank and decide before she said a word who she was and what she was worth. Walking in knowing it. Letting it happen because she needed to see the baseline. Carrying her wound and doing the work anyway because the work was the only thing that made the wound mean something. He said, "Let's go." The evolution began. The work continued. And the program that Ryan Mitchell ran, the one he had built over 22 years and rebuilt over 4 weeks. The one that had cost him certainty and given him something more accurate in its place, moved forward into everything that came next, with the particular strength of a thing that had been tested all the way down to its foundation, and chosen deliberately, and with full understanding of the cost to build something better on the ground it found there. That was the program. That was the standard. And the woman who had walked in alone on a Tuesday morning and been laughed at in front of 80 men had made it so, not by force, not by authority, not by revealing the record. Nobody was allowed to talk about, but by doing the hardest and most essential thing that leadership required. She had told the truth, and she had kept telling it until the room was ready to hear it. That was who Emily Carter was. That was what she had earned. And no one in that building, not Ryan Mitchell, not Harmon, not Briggs, not Kellerman, not any of the 80 men who had laughed on day one, would ever again mistake silence for weakness, humility for inexperience, or a clean uniform for an empty record. That was the lesson. It had cost exactly what it needed to cost, and it would last.